Good morning, everyone. I'm almost awake. I'm still on Virginia time, I think. I'm super excited to be here. I have not been out of the States since before COVID, and I was about ready to break. And I'm just excited to see people outside of a little Zoom box. I don't know about you, but that drives me nuts. And it's great to actually see people, shake hands with them, and grab a beer. I hate this damn remote world we live in now. This was an oddly apropos talk, I think, for a conference obsessed with bringing up lots of servers really rapidly. Because the other side of everything you guys are doing is trying to also grow your engineering org rapidly and trying to support it. Both of them have unique problems. It seems like computers have one set of problems, and dealing with humans, it's its own thing. Which is why, by the way, I'm afraid of the whole AI apocalypse, because I sort of figured out how humans work and how to manage them. And I don't want another thing to figure out how to manage. Damn it. Today we'll be talking about growing engineering orgs from zero to IPO. This sort of came as a genesis of Nick and I working at Reddit and realizing that this is not discussed well enough. And so we started working on a book. We're currently one chapter a decade, so if you just extrapolate that out, what, 200 years? Oh, it'll come out. We did intro, so I'm going to skip this slide. And I thought I'd start this off with a little story. Basically, application of what you're going to learn in this talk to our experience at Reddit. Nick and I showed up at Reddit around 2015, and it was a 10-year-old company that had never really been run at high speed. It sort of languished. And it had some bizarre side effects of starting to pull out of that languishing, starting to grow. We had 30-person stand-ups. That doesn't work. Google Slide and Google Sheets for tracking all the products within the company, and that doesn't scale very well. Very slow delivery pace. Smash Brothers. Why Smash Brothers? Nick will cover that in a moment, but there was a lot of urgent work to do and a lot of Smash Brothers being played. And don't get me wrong, I love Smash Brothers, and I'm pretty good, so if any of you want to fight me after this, let me know. But trying to build a multi-billion-dollar company doesn't start with Smash Brothers, unless you're Nintendo. So Nick and I came in, along with Steve and a number of execs, and we worked our butts off on this company, just trying to turn it into a normal, functioning Silicon Valley company. And if we fast forward to 1 year later, or a few years later, around 2018, it had then grown from 20-ish engineers to 40 and then 140 engineers. Now it's, I don't know, 2,000 or so. There was actually focused product strategy broken down into quarters and years. That's kind of amazing. Rapid on-time execution, and we were checking it weekly, which is kind of important for your cadence. Just keep it moving fast and steady. And then we had also fundamentally re-architected large portions of the tech stack, which was really hard to do, but also super important, not just because Reddit was suffering from user scale, it was suffering from employee scale. Suddenly you've got all these employees, and they're all sitting in line to deploy code, and they're all getting upset. So you have to re-architect everything for this new world where you're now way more engineers. And then we were shipping products rapidly. And one thing that Nick and I had observed as we were reflecting on this is, you don't start companies by writing opcodes and building a database. You just go download MySQL or something else. But with processes and how you manage, those are redone all the time, which is kind of cool because you get this whole world of different kinds of companies doing different things. But I know there's a lot of different ways to make a chocolate chip cookie. Here's one good one. Just start with that, damn it. Don't reinvent the wheel, every damn company. If you are reinventing the wheel, you're not alone. All these guys that you might recognize did this too, and they survived. But what's more interesting than these folks on this slide, all these folks started with no experience. Mark Zuckerberg was in school. Elon Musk started Zip2 by dropping out of his PhD. I think the most important thing to learn from here is how much money you can make by dropping out of a PhD. But the people who are not on this slide are more interesting, and the reason they're not on this slide is because they didn't survive. And one stat, I know all stats, or 80% of stats are made up on the moment, but within 3 years, 92% of startups fail, 43% are due to scale. So my hope in doing this talk and this book that'll come out in 200 years is that we might be able to save some startups from failure. So we're going to break this into about 5 rough pieces that, to dive deeper into. First is mission and vision. then setting objectives, measuring results, organization structure, and execution. And I'm going to hand it off to Nick to talk about, as promised, to start with Smash Brothers.
All right. Hey, everybody. I'm going to take the clicker from Marty.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. And jump into the first of our 5 tools that we hope you'll be able to use. And that is lesson number 1, setting a mission statement for your organization. As Marty alluded to earlier, in modern software development, you have got to be more exciting and more compelling than Smash Brothers. You know, when I first joined Reddit, that first week I was there, I mean, Marty's not lying. You had engineers sitting in the corner, like mastering Mario, Link, and all the other characters. And as a manager, you can't really get mad about that. You have to ask yourself, like, why are these folks so excited about Smash Brothers and not excited about working on one of the best websites that's ever been created? I believe that comes down to the need for every single person in an organization to understand how they fit into the overall mission, so that they're more excited about that than Smash Brothers. So let's talk about what is a great mission statement. First, I want to start by telling you what it is not. And this is where a lot of companies get tripped up. Instead of talking about mission, they'll talk about vision. Vision statements are great. Here's one of my favorite ones, Martin Luther King. I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know that tonight, we as a people will get to the promised land. And that's an amazing statement. That's a vision. That's what the future should look like. The problem is the future is really freaking far away, and you need to ship stuff next quarter. So, tool number 1, how to create a mission statement. Mission statement is 3 things: clear goal, how you're going to do it, and a time limit. And then to really jazz it up, you want a block quote on a black and white photo. And I'll show you what that looks like. One of my favorite mission statements, JFK, 1961, I believe this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth. Has all of those components. Clear goal, timeline, how you're going to do it safely. Let's do a practice run with Marty. I believe we can present 5 simple tools for building engineering organizations delivered with clarity and humor in under 45 minutes. Great job, Marty.
Time us. I think it's going to be 48 minutes.
We're not going to hit the time. Now, once you've got your mission statement crafted, that's not enough. You've got to figure out how to communicate it. The first one is repeat. Repeat it again. Repeat it some more, over and over and over again. Your organization will forget. And one of the biggest challenges is making sure that your mission statement cascades to the organization so that everyone knows what it is. Amazon actually has a great tool. We're not going to talk about this in detail, but they have a great tool called executive press releases, which sort of gets at this need to have the mission and vision mission statement stick in people's head. And essentially what they do is they ask you to write sort of a pretend press release for the day that your feature would launch. Like, what would the headline in the newspaper in the first couple of paragraphs say? And you actually do that press release before you start working on whatever your projects are. Now, more in line with the spirit of this talk, I believe the best way to express your mission is actually through a product roadmap. Like, take that hill over there, and then take that one. Now, product roadmaps, I think, are the best expression of what you want your organization to just run after. It captures all the requirements, the timelines, and priorities. And for that reason, lesson number 2 is going to be about objectives and roadmaps. Go for it, Marty.
All right. I don't know if everybody's used OKRs, but there's many different things you can use, but this is my favorite. And part of the reason I like it so much is it tells you what you're going to accomplish in a little bit of English that's easy to communicate broadly and to understand, and then something very hyper-specific that we're going to be grading ourselves on. I'm going to talk first about objectives. This is what you're trying to accomplish. I like it to be in plain English. We're going to tell you how to get there. So how to get to your objectives. We're going to start by building a roadmap. I wish more people knew how to do this because I've seen a lot of really bad roadmaps. We're going to need 3 things. We're going to need strategy. We're going to break that strategy into themes, and then finally into objectives. And so the intention with this whole talk, by the way, is that later you'll go back to the slides when you're like, holy shit, I have to put together a roadmap. How do I do that? How did Marty and Nick do it? And then you can come back and you can email us, and we'll get you going in the right direction. I'm not going to go into strategy. This is something that there's entire books figured out, but what I do want you to do is to admit to yourself, if you don't really know what strategy is and how to make one, that you do what I did in Pinterest of about 2013 and be like, I got to get on my game. And I started reading everything there was about it. Nick was just telling me the cool new thing is to be jobs to be done. I haven't looked at this tool myself, but you can see there's 10 million tools. So I'm not going to go into it here, but if you don't know what it is for certain, this is the time to start learning and go obsessed with it. I started, honestly, on Wikipedia being like, what the hell does the word even mean? But a good strategy really acts kind of like a mathematical equation that shows everything. So for instance, you may look at your growth and say, well, where do people come from and how many stay and why do they leave? And look at some sort of a classic wheel of people hopefully staying on your site and some leaving and some coming in. And then you want to optimize it. A really good strategy will pop out ideas. And so give your strategy, given the macro world, given what your intuition is, you pop out themes. And usually because we're building a startup, we have 10,000 ideas, right? But humans don't work well with 10,000. They work well with 3. Don't even do 4 if you can avoid it. Do 3. So take the top 3, and as Steve Jobs once said, if you do this right, it should hurt. So you're going to whop off number 4 and everything below it. This is what we had at Reddit, I think 2016. We had an outdated UX. It looked like spam. We had bad quality. The website was going down often, and it was slow. That was also burning out the engineers. That's not good. And we had no personalization. So everybody in the world was seeing almost the same experience on Reddit unless you tweaked it. And not everybody in the world's the same person. I know that's odd, but it's true. So you take your themes, and you start to break those down. So for instance, I'll look at quality and perf. Our search sucked. Still kind of sucks today. But at the time, it was really, really bad. It was so bad that it was costing us some ridiculous amount per month, and it was about to just falter and break completely. So we needed to start working on that. And we also had really slow load times, seconds. You're supposed to be measuring in hundreds of milliseconds. I used to have a joke that we weren't measuring in a number of 9s of uptime, we were measuring a number of 8s. So these are your objectives. You rotate this and you get a timeline. There's our timeline. And prioritization, if your higher prioritization stuff you want to put earlier, and you need to sequence some stuff. So we can't do index and tuning on a search engine if we don't have a search engine that works, so you need to sequence those. The other most important part of a roadmap is to get rid of the future, because it's BS. Now, it's good to think about, but the idea that you're going to get, especially at a startup, if you're at Intel, this is true. They go 13 years out. But that's no fun. So if you're getting to about 3 months from now, you'll know that there's no way that those things you said in the future are likely to be true. And there you have your roadmap. So this is tool number 2. So come back to this when you're ready to make a roadmap. Couple of tips. Direction can change in an instant, but destination should take time. So if we get on a boat right now headed for New York City, everybody on there is going to be really upset if they find out, no, we're going to Miami. But you're going to change a little bit depending on the currents. Emotion isn't always about progress. Great objectives should have measurable outcomes. So that brings us to the next portion. Measuring results. So do you all remember this scene from Return of the Jedi? So Darth Vader comes off the ship, scary as hell. He starts talking to this guy who's about to pee himself and basically says, how's that Death Star go? And the guy says, oh, it's good, it's good. And Darth Vader's like, I don't think that's true. And the other guy's like, oh, crud. And then Darth Vader tells him the Emperor's coming, and the guy just really starts to freak out. You know what they were doing? They were having a manager discussion about OKRs, and it wasn't going well. Now, in this day and age, you're not allowed to force lightning someone. It's not HR friendly. They don't like that. But he did do a good job. He's a good manager. When the Emperor came soon after, he's like, yeah, Death Star's almost done. Good job. So we're going to talk about how to be the Darth Vader of measuring results. So I talked about objective, and so I want to give you some examples. So objective, good, English phrase, something that everybody can understand. So one we had at Reddit, grow the mobile user base. And it's interesting, this stuff will change probably quarterly as you learn about it, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But interesting, it says the mobile user base. So there's reasons why you chose, why would we choose mobile over all users, things to think about. Then the key result here, though, was a lot more nuanced. And I know that's a mouthful, increased mobile DAUs from 10 million to 11 million, average over the last 14 days by end of quarter. But what the intention here is, it's got to be clear how you're doing. And it's got to be clear what the most important thing is in the company. it's also super important not to obsess over this stuff and to be holistic, but it's also important that you know what you actually care about. So what I'm going to do, I know that was a mouthful, so I'm going to give you a little recipe so when you're sitting there, you can do this right, and you can give this to all your engineers and PMs and everybody else so they can also do it right. So there's 4 pieces. What is being improved and by how much, and we're going to talk about that. The time frame the measurement is over, we'll talk about that too. The time frame for delivering this key result, and finally status. I want status every damn time I talk to you because I want to see how things are going. I want you to be measuring it, and I want you to try to project when it's coming in so we can have a thoughtful discussion about how we're going. So let's break this down. So the first part is really the recipe, right? Let's take an example. So spam. So spam is the thing you care about, say. There should be 4 things this should meet. 1 is meaningful. Does this thing we're talking about, the reducing spam or growing the mobile user base, does it actually achieve our objective? And you have to use a little intuition here, but that's helpful to talk about. Motivation. We're talking about humans, right? We're not leading AI bots yet, although I'd give it another 5 months. So does this get people excited? Is it measurable? Can you actually measure the thing you're wanting to do? And sometimes you can't. And finally, is it operational? So can you actually affect timely and meaningful change to this key result? So let me show you an example. I know this is a lot of stuff, but I think an example helps a lot. Reduce number of spam reports. So this is one I used at Pinterest 2014 or so. Is it meaningful? Kind of. I mean, if you get a lot of reports of spam, that can be meaningful. But if it's good spam, nobody reports it because they don't know it's spam. So that's a problem. Is it motivational? Oh yeah, people got excited because you're going after a true adversary. Is it measurable? Very, very measurable. I just measure how many reports came in and I put it on a graph and I have it within a second, which leads me to operational. It was very fast. If you put up a new spam algorithm, you could actually see the graph go down, or if you screwed up, you could see it go back up really fast. That was really nice. But it's not meaningful, or it's kind of meaningful, and it only loses meaning over time. A better one that's far more meaningful is reduce the number of times a user sees spam. So a lot of users want to know they saw spam, but I want them to not see spam. I want to protect my users, I want to protect my brand. So very meaningful, very motivational, exciting. We're up against an adversary. Measurable, no. Because if I knew it was spam, I'd get rid of it. So how the hell do I measure it? It's kind of weird. What we ended up with was we would look back. We got really good at knowing that we for sure saw all the spam, but it took 48 hours. So we were measuring retroactively, which leads me to operational. That meant a change in a thing right now would take 48 hours for me to figure out if it worked. So, but it was ultimately meaningful. So that's the one we chose, and then we just worked on sub-metrics that were more measurable, more operational. By how much? I love this picture. This is what evolves in your company. In the beginning, just start with anything. That's the important thing. And any recipe you can, just something to get it going. So in the beginning, you look like this. That's fine. It's funny how pencils in the nose looks way dumber than pencils in the mouth. By the end, I'm going to have you looking like a scientifically modeled prediction. And this is what you're going to look like when you hit IPO or somewhere close to it. This is what it looks like over time. So in the beginning, just have your key result be build or ship something. So build the email service, because we got to interact with our customers, right? But that's not an actual business value add. I mean, in theory it will be, but the actual business value add is how many users you re-engage. Something in your strategy. So getting users back in, getting new users in. So what you'll eventually, very soon after you ship that thing, you should immediately shift over to improve some arbitrarily chosen key result by an arbitrarily feel-good amount. So I don't know. We're going to send out 10,000 emails in a couple months. So that's kind of about scale. But soon after, increase user retention, next day retention by 1.5%. I don't know. And the reason it's important to choose anything is because the very next week, as you start to figure this out and measure it, you're going to realize all the problems with it. And you're going to get better at it. You're going to get to the point where you're improving some carefully crafted key result by an educated guess. And then when you hit IPO, improve a carefully crafted key result based on analysis of available effort and impact projected from past performance and expected trends. You will get to the point where you're saying, I'm going to decrease the number of people viewing spam by 1.32% to 1.31% if you give me this number. You can go to the CEO and say, if you give me this headcount. If you don't give me this headcount, here's how the number will adjust, and you give all the tools to the CEO so that they can make a decision. How long for that measurement window? Usually people will give me a key result like say the spam one. I'm going to reduce spam reports by 10,000 and 9,000 by the end of the quarter. I'm like, 9,000, so you're going to measure over the last second? No, that's not what I mean. I'm like, okay, well, what's your measurement window? So first I asked them that question, then we actually get to the meat of it. Well, two of my favorite is, when are you going to measure? The last 2 weeks, we're going to do some sort of an average or some sort of an equation on the last 2 weeks to sum it up, or the whole quarter. And they have two very different meanings that are very important. As a team, we're going to go build a bunch of stuff, right? And then hopefully that will do good things. So if this is spam reports, we're going to take most of the quarter to build the cool new machine learning, whatever, and then we're going to ship it. And then look, flatlined, beautiful. But I don't want to be dinged for the whole quarter. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So 2 weeks is great for when you're going to work your butt off on something and then deliver something great at the end. Whole quarter is, now that we've maybe flatlined spam, next quarter I might have one of my key results be keep it low, keep it maintained. So that's great for a whole quarter. Line in the sand, we're not going to get any worse, we're not going to get any, or we're going to keep the quality some level high. Yes? Okay, important thing about OKRs is they should cascade. So you got your ultimate mission of the company. At Reddit, let me see if it'll pop up here. Oh, all over it. It was to help people discover places where they can be their true selves and empower those communities then to grow. So everything should feed into that, right? So then the top three OKRs we had at the company, remember 3, not more, you'll break people. We had grow mobile user base. This is sort of focused on growth. We had one around revenue, build a sustainable business, which was our way of not saying the word money, because we had a lot of people who didn't like that word. And then become a destination employer. We wanted to shift Reddit from what it was, which is really struggling internally, to being the place where people are like, damn, I want to work at Reddit. They're building some cool stuff. And so we had these 3. And then all the other OKRs inside the company should ideally contribute to those. It's not always the case they will. You need to be a little more holistic. So for instance, you may not be able to make the link that getting rid of spam will increase the user base. In fact, I've seen it be the opposite. At Pinterest, we were working on getting rid of spam. We got so good at it, we realized the spammers were actually engaging the users in a weird way. So we're like, okay, we got to be better than the spammers and engaging our own users. But we also felt like it was important to remove the spam so that the site didn't just become a mess. But all these should feed in. So improve site uptime. There's been causal links on improving site uptime and getting growth. So things like that. Shipping a new video product, we thought, well, surely that'll help with mobile user base. It'll also open us up to a whole new revenue stream. And there's tons more. This is all your teams. This one's not, you don't apply the rules of 3. This is every team should have 1 or 2 OKRs. And this will also map to your org chart, which is I'm going to pass to Nick to talk about building a great org chart.
All right. Oh, thank you, Marty. Okay, org chart. All right, so you've got your mission, your objectives. You know how you're going to measure it. Now you're going to form up and go after it. War is not won with spearmen or cavalry, but with effective organization. Now, your organization needs to be shaped in the best possible way at all times to meet whatever your goals are. So what type of organization should you use? This is a famous quote by a guy named Mel Conway. For you manager nerds in the audience, you probably have heard this before. Organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of that organization. This is just a fancy way of saying that you are eventually going to ship your org chart. And this is actually not a bad thing. Like you often hear people say, don't ship your org chart. It can lead to some weird product decisions, but it's not a bad thing. It's something that you have to actually embrace if you want to scale your company. So the new rule, or revised Conway's law, is, okay, we're going to ship the org chart, but at all times we should make sure we have the right one. Okay, now in the next few slides, I'm going to try and walk you through how you can scale your startup from maybe 10 people to 50 plus using some simple tricks. Let's see what we start with. Well, if you've got around 10 or fewer people, this is not that hard. You've got a flat structure. Probably everyone reports to the CEO. Let's move on. Gets a little bit more complicated as you start adding people. Typically, you're going to have specializations around platforms or technology. So this is what Reddit looked like when I joined. I think Marty and I would join. I have 35 people. We had an iOS team, Android team, infrastructure team, and a web team. And essentially at this stage, almost everything's vertically integrated. You've got maybe 1 or 2 managers floating around. I think when we joined Reddit, there was no managers. No managers.
Me.
Yeah, just Marty. All right. And then as you scale further, you start to see feature teams emerge, right? So folks who are not necessarily working purely on technologies, but maybe they're picking up things like, hey, I'm going to work on search, I'm going to work on the front page, et cetera. Now, the interesting thing here is that many of these teams begin competing for the same resources. Maybe they have increasing number of dependencies on your ops team, or maybe people want to make more and more changes to the API. But the thing is, like, dependencies are starting to emerge within this relatively flat org structure, until at a certain point it gets too big for a single director to manage. And around, I would say this is around 50 people, you start to see the emergence of new product groups. And rather than specializing on a particular technology, your product group's going to specialize on a specific customer problem. And then they'll start to take dependencies on this new group, the shared technology group. That's because, for every new product team that emerges, it's not like they need their own security group, their IT group, et cetera. That can be a shared set of capabilities across the entire company, or the foundation that the rest of the products are built on. So, tool number 4, how to build a 50-plus org chart in 3 steps. Step number 1, what are your product pillars? So, this can be designed in a lot of different ways. My personal favorite way to do this is think about customer personas, or alternatively, what are your major product problems? So for something like a Reddit or a Twitter, you're going to have an ads team, like people who are paying for and purchasing ads. It's a very distinct feature set and set of functionality from people who just want to browse for cool posts. Those are so distinct that they may need different product pillars. Second, your foundation and your roof, right? These are all of those shared teams I talked about earlier. Your infrastructure teams, your DevOps teams, et cetera, form the basis of your organization. They need to be the most stable, long-running parts of your team. And then you've got outward-looking functionality like growth, data science. These are all about trying to more deeply understand how your customers are using your product. And with that general outline, you think about the sub-teams within each part of the house. So what are the major activities, major objectives of each of these groups, and can you put a box around them? A simple way to think through if you've got the right sort of division of labor here is, can you crisply define a mission statement for every box within your org chart? Now, how did that end up looking at Reddit? We had our product pillars. The Reddit community experience was essentially the Reddit website and the mobile application. Search and relevance became such a complex problem for Reddit that we needed to specialize on that. The rationale being that as we shifted from the older, what was it called, the HOT algorithm, more of a heuristic-driven algorithm toward machine learning, we need specialization in that area. We had monetization, the ads team, publishing. Foundation, you see what you'd expect there, API services, DevOps, et cetera. And then we had a growth team, which was essentially looking at a meta information, data science, or how people were using the platform. All right. Now, as a bonus step, just to reiterate, you have to do this over and over again. You have to repeat on some regular cycle. Mel Conway always said the design which occurs first is almost never the best possible. The prevailing system may need to change. Therefore, flexibility of organization is important to effective design. Now, this is really tough because what we're really saying here is you got to reorg your company every once in a while as it scales, and people don't like reorgs. They don't like new managers. Marty and I are trying to give you the tools that you need to scale your organization. One of the bits of advice I would suggest is that you early on, as early as possible, get your team comfortable with reorgs and moving people around. You as leaders have to get really comfortable explaining the rationale behind it. That can be a really tough dance. But the better you get at this, the more able you'll be to keep your organization focused on its most important goals. Okay, now, you've got your mission, you've got your KRs, your metrics, you've got an organization. Now you need to execute. Let's get the machinery actually going. So execution is all about getting stuff done on a predictable time with a predictable set of quality. And this is probably the most difficult thing to do in any organization at any scale. But why? Why is this so difficult? Well, I think there's three basic reasons. As your organization gets better or bigger, everyone wants to know what everyone else is doing. Like, it's not like I don't want to tell you what I'm doing because you might judge me on it, but I definitely want to know what you're doing because I might need to judge you on it and take dependencies and so on and so forth. But all that means is that communication starts to get harder. Like, people can't see from one end of the ship to the other. And you got to think about ways to enable that sort of communication. Roadmaps is one mechanism, but there's many, many others. The second is coordinating. All right, you have more teams. You just saw an org chart that scales up to 50. All those teams are going to have different roadmaps. They may have PMs, managers floating around all of a sudden. Good God, like there's so much process overhead that's starting to emerge. How can we scale efficiently while adding all of this bureaucracy, meetings, and so on and so forth? And then third, bottlenecks. As you start to design these complex organizations with interdependent missions and interdependent product roadmaps, it becomes harder and harder to detect when a bottleneck in team A is going to affect the outcome of team D over here. So this all means that as you get bigger, like adding more and more people, you don't necessarily become more efficient. So I'd say a rule of thumb is for every engineer you add to the team, you add 1.1 engineers worth of features to the roadmap, which means that eventually your coordination costs, your scope, is going to overcome your ability to deliver reliably. And the way that you solve that is a process change or reorg. Now, great execution is all about finding the rhythm where all of this works smoothly. You have to find a way to do this in a flow that continually seeks out and resolves and finds bottlenecks and determines priorities at every level of your organization. Now, I want to give you one mistake to avoid, and I like to give you mistakes I've made myself so that you don't have to repeat them. So if you've ever done this in the past, maybe you'll empathize, but one of the first things I did when I was a new manager, a new director, was I hired an agile coach. And he came in and he brought all of the Scrum processes to our organization at the same time, which did not go well. And what you end up doing in those sorts of situations, if you're on a small team, is spending a lot of time trying to figure out the definition of a story point. And God, please, no one in the audience try and answer that question. But you spend a lot of time talking about very rigid processes instead of actually shipping stuff. So I vowed to never make that mistake again and try and, for every organization, start out with as little process as I possibly could. So starting with minimal process. I'll tell you what inspired me to this. It's the original Kanban, not the Kanban that you read about in most modern Agile books, but if you read about the original Toyota Kanban or Kaizen, it was all about minimal process created from the bottoms up. So for example, you're on the Toyota production line, you're a worker down there, something goes wrong, like maybe one of the parts isn't fitting correctly, you can't figure out why. There's a cord called the andon cord on your production line. You reach up, you pull it, something's wrong, that signals the managers. The managers descend from manager heaven down to you in your lowly production line. They say, what's up? What's going on? And at that point, you say, hey, like this piece didn't work. Something's wrong with the production line. And only then do the managers come up with a new process. And you can imagine if this iterates over and over repeatedly, that you're going to come up with the minimal amount of process in order to make those cars come off the line with high quality and predictability. So I like that because it's flexible. You're only adding process when you need it, right? So remember that process becomes culture over time as well. So, start with something nimble and flexible, and then when you end up with 50, 100 people, that'll be part of your DNA. Okay, now, how do we do this? All right, so this is a Kanban board. I'm sure many of you have seen this. This is the default out-of-box Kanban board that your typical team is going to use: to do, in progress, in review, ready to deploy, et cetera. The question is, well, how can we take this framing and make it something that will scale up to an entire organization? And Marty and I came up with this tool. It's called the Epic Workflow. And you can essentially modify Jira or Asana to add these additional states into your workflow. And I've used this at the last 4 companies that I've worked at. So what are the states? Definition, planning, and staffing. Definition, you're defining what your objectives or your projects are. Planning, that's when you sit down, you write your specs, or maybe look at the technical complexity, estimation, et cetera. Staffing, do you actually have the people / resources necessary to complete the project? Are they actually available? So your project over time will progress through these 3 states. Then they'll go on to execution. Your team's actually building and testing the software. Launch, make sure that your launch is coordinated with any sort of cross-functional partners, marketing, et cetera. And then monitor, like once the thing's in production, is it meeting all of the associated metrics? Now, each of these has a due date, and you can then use that due date in regular execution review meetings to see whether or not your projects are on track across your entire company. So here's how that looks from a manager perspective. You can see all of the work that your team might be doing, whether or not they're on track, overdue, et cetera. And then you can roll these up. If everyone in your company is using the same format, you can roll these up into a director view that lets you see across all of the themes of investment in your company what the status are. And then to go one level higher, just one sec, forgot about all these animations. One level higher, this isn't maybe the best representation of it, but I wanted to call it the types of things execs would typically care about. They want all that same information, but the difference is they're going to zoom in on the most salient bits of it from the executive level, whatever their top priorities are. So they want to see themes and work stream status, but filtered to whatever they think the most important things across the company are. OKRs for the most critical objectives, and the most importantly, alignment. Having been an exec at multiple companies now, trying to make sure that all of the functions and all of your product teams are aligned when a launch occurs tends to be very challenging. Making sure that everyone's shipping using the same sort of criteria helps a lot in that regard. Now, we rolled this out at Reddit, and we had some really good results. These are results here. So this is the number of completed Jira epics by quarter. And what you see here is that in the first quarter with, I promise you, no additional headcount, simply by adding this process, we were able to almost double the amount of epics that came out. Okay. Now, that was our 5 tools, and we are going to leave you with a few final thoughts on scaling and culture.
Anyone just click it? Yeah. Fast is not the same as frantic. Frantic looks like everybody going nuts and spinning their gears. Fast looks like what Nick was just talking about, where we have, say, an execution meeting every Monday, and we move the epics, and we keep them moving in lockstep throughout the entire company. It becomes the heartbeat of your company. That's what good looks like. It doesn't look like panic.
Second, you want to try and build a diverse and inclusive organization as you scale, not after you scale. And this means thinking about your hiring practices, all the maybe gushy HR stuff that you don't want to have to worry about later. If you aren't considering this as you build your teams, well, there's lots of studies that show building a diverse and inclusive and equitable environment results in you being able to ship more effectively. I personally just think they result in workplaces that are more fun to be in, and that explains like 90% of it. So do this early on. Don't wait until you have 50 or 100 people. It's very hard to fix after the fact.
Last thing, there's a book called Creativity Inc., which is one of my favorites by Ed Catmull, who was the president of Pixar during their heyday. He said, if you give a good idea to a mediocre team, they will screw it up. If you give a mediocre idea to a brilliant team, they will either fix it or throw it away and come up with something better. And there's sort of a similar phrase that I also use a lot, which is A players hire A players and B players hire C players. There's a lot of sacrifices you're going to have to make. You can't ship stuff fast enough. You've got to hire. That's hard to do, possibly because you're a startup and nobody's ever heard of you. They're all going to Facebook. This is the one place not to sacrifice, because the moment you do, you will slide down, and then you'll get on that exponential slide down. So better to struggle and not have enough headcount than to just take anybody who can type.
All right. So that wraps it up. We have a couple calls of action to you. I saw tons of people taking. Well, there's someone. You don't have to take a picture of this. Trust me. All right. If you want the slides, they're available right now on that link. And follow Marty on Threads now. He's abandoned Twitter.
Yeah. X. It's called X.
Is that what it is now?
I don't know.
I'm XX.
It's going to be something next week.
If it's around next week.
Yeah.
Marty's doing a fantastic podcast, The Fourth Age. It's all about AI, so go and check that out. You can follow me still on Twitter at @NickCald. I haven't, for some reason, jumped ship yet. And I'm doing a new investment fund. So anyone who's got seed, pre-seed, AI, and enterprise SaaS, come and talk to me. All right. With that, thank you. Are we getting booted, or do we have time for Q&A?
No, you've got time. So can we get a huge round of applause for Marty and Nick? So if you guys don't mind, just for a couple of minutes, if anybody has any questions for these guys, do you mind? So if we do have any questions, raise your hand. I am going to run with Nick's mic and hand it to you if anybody has any questions. So do we have any questions? Here we go. Thank you. I'll bring it back. Let us know your name and then your question.
Hi, Fernando here. That was a very nice talk, thank you. I especially like your job at Scrum and how engineers didn't like it. That was pretty funny to me. I'm very curious about, you said that engineers, when you arrive at Reddit, they were playing Smash Brothers. And in my experience is usually when engineers are not doing work is because the job is not challenging enough for them, or because the job is not interesting enough for them. And you mentioned that you created a lot of goals and planning for them to get more motivated, which is probably, arguably, one of the most important parts there. But were there any specific examples of other bits that were very frustrating for engineers in terms of like them not being able to get engaged in the work, achieving flow? I mean, maybe it was like too many meetings, or the code base was really messy, or et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, that was it. Sorry for the long question.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of them. I'll just pick one. Maybe Marty can share another one. But one of the things that kind of blew me away when I got there, we had all company stand-ups every week to talk about the product roadmap with like people who weren't even necessarily on the product team. So I'm trying to imagine like the life of an engineer here who like every Friday has to spend, these meetings were long too. Remember, it was like hour and a half or two?
Hour and a half, yeah.
Yeah, hour and a half stand up with the entire company to talk through every nuance of the product. Actually, the product roadmap didn't even exist then. Yeah, it was just ideating. So it's just a get together and vibe, products, man. So meetings, I think, was my most frustrating thing on day one.
I think there's also a group dynamic. If the whole company has a broad set of, let's go forward, it's difficult to execute against that, and it's difficult to get excited. But if your team has your OKRs and the whole team's getting together and they're going and throwing axes and then having beers and then coming back and just becoming a team against one OKR, that's the times I've seen the teams really gel. Because then you also, your team's also depending on you. So if you're over there playing Smash Bros and your friend's like, dude, get back here, we're trying to work on this together, you also feel like you're letting go. But it's like anything else. If you have a group dynamic of 1,000 people and you don't do anything, nobody will notice, right? So there's a little bit of breaking it into smaller pieces that are more bite-sized chunks that us humans can understand.
And that shared alignment and shared goals makes a big difference too. So like part of having roadmaps and taking dependencies, it's not just being able to point at what the mission is, it's that we all agree that that's the most important thing. And then we can work together to achieve those goals.
Thank you. Do we have maybe one more question? I'm going to come here. I know there are more hands. Unfortunately, we don't have all day. Who was it? Can I just get your name and then your question, please?
Yeah, hey there, Sal Kimmick. I really liked the talk around, basically this is about like roadmap scoping and like when you say you're going to spend money on a feature, does it get done, right? That's what Agile lets you measure. But I am really curious, right? Because what you're talking about across these is the trade-off between future and road mapping and how much actually gets scoped and gets done. So I'm curious, what's the sweet spot in how far you look ahead in a roadmap? And I know this changes. How does it change when you've got a company of 50 engineers, 100 engineers, or 500?
Yeah, I think I would claim that like 50 and 100 are within the same sort of scale unit. That like, you know, as at Looker, I had like a 300-person team, and I told them, don't plan anything past 6 months, because we're still a startup, we're gonna have to iterate, and anything you put like past 6 months, to the extent that we wanna talk about it, it's so that we can tell our customers that we're thinking about stuff. But for this talk, we're really talking about like execution. How do you like get things shipped reliably? So I'd say up to around 500 people, like 6 months is good. Past that, though, you do have to start thinking about like much broader investments, like your budgets go up, et cetera. But even then, I would say you never plan with any sort of accuracy beyond 6 months. So it's much more about being able to explain the organization thematically what's important for the year, so that so they can understand that you as leaders have a vision that goes beyond 6 months. But when it comes to committed dates, there's a few things that I want to make sure happen. Like, we don't hard commit anything beyond 6 months, because I just don't believe, as someone who shipped a lot of software, that it can be done accurately. And to the extent that within 6 months we're trying to predict dates, that we've got buy-in from the engineering team. Like, one of the worst things you can have happen is like the PM or like an exec is trying to explain when a due date is going to happen. Like, that needs to come bottoms up from the engineering team, in my opinion.
I was going to say just one other thing. That the only place where I think beyond that matters is either if you're IBM or Intel, in which case you have such a large ship, you actually need to steer it at that scale. The other is sometimes your industry will need that kind of further out thinking. Like if you're in the medical industry, the FDA demand, or I don't know what the equivalent is in England, but the US FDA demands that you give a long distance lookout. Now the dates are always baloney, but the sequence of things you will be building hopefully are a little more mapped out. But if you don't have to do all that awful stuff, it's much better to be agile and nimble. Not capital A agile, but lowercase a agile. I think we're out of time. You can catch us all. We'll hang out and.
We want to get brunch right now. Right?
Oh, geez. Okay. Well, we'll be around later.
Here. Yeah. Okay. We'll see you all later.
Gentlemen, excellent job. Can we get another round of applause as they leave the stage?